Due to the content of this presentation, parental guidance is recommended to 16 years. In the years 1980 to 2013, Hells Angels had fought 3 wars for the dominance of Denmark and Scandinavia. They had won the first war against Bullshit MC decisively. It was a draw against banditos in the Great Nordic Biker War, and they had lost the war against the immigrant gangs. After 3 decades of war, Hells Angels' Denmark grip was faltering. They were no longer the force they once had been. They had lost control of the lucrative cannabis business to the immigrant gangs and lost control of the underworld in big parts of Denmark to their rival banditos. Internal conflicts within the Angels had also degraded their dominance, and several of HA's most prominent members had been kicked out in bad standing after disagreements and power struggles internally.
Du havde en forestilling om, at du kom ind i sådan et lukket broderskab, der var helt specielt, ikke? Altså, så må jeg så sige, da jeg selv blev medlem, så krakelerede spejlet lidt, ikke? Men okay, ja.
And with an average of 2 to 3 members being kicked out every year in Denmark, many doing long prison terms, and the fact that they only accept white men as members, the Angels had trouble recruiting. Their numbers were dwindling.
Det danske rockermiljø er i begyndelsen meget homogent. Det er hvide arbejderklassemænd, som kører på motorcykel.
But a new club was now reaching Denmark, and again, similar to how the war with the banditos had started in Denmark, the war with Satudarah MC began because of a conflict ignited by Hells Angels. Satudarah had no recruitment problems, since they accept members of all colors, and old Hells Angels and banditos members that had been kicked out was also welcomed in, and Saturdarah quickly was double the size of Hells Angels in Denmark. A new Danish biker war would soon explode, and the Danish Hells Angels would be in their 4th major conflict in 35 years. This is Biker History with Magnus. The conflict between the two started in Denmark when the club Verbros Hardcore, longtime friends and allies of the Angels, applied for membership in the club. The VHC's first members had made their mark in the criminal underworld for many years and were involved in the bloody conflicts with the immigrant gangs. However, VHC had members who had African origin, and this was against the international rules of the club, which in no lesser terms are expressed like this. This created a rift internally, since many members wanted to accept them after their long friendship, but it made other members reluctant. They were unwilling to break this rule of the club. This rejection turned their old friends into enemies and made VHC apply for membership in the upcoming club Satudarah MC in 2013.
Altså selve navnet Satudarah betyder jo et blod. Alle hudfarver er velkomne.
With the new chapter in Denmark, Saturdarah is soon run down by eager young men of all ethnicities who want to join, and they quickly spread out over the country.
Hvis Hells Angels havde været lidt mere omstillingsparate, som man vil sige på nudansk, og måske kunne acceptere og inkludere nogle af de her såkaldte indvandrergrupper, så er det ikke sikkert, at billedet havde set ud, som det havde været i dag. Så selve Satudarah vokser mere ud af det, man kunne kalde traditionel gadebande, end en egentlig rockerklub.
The first fight between them happened at a bar, Lions and Barrels, where there were members present from both clubs at the same time, and those who have watched my other biker videos know that this is not going to end well. In February 2014, members from the 2 clubs, former allies and best friends, ended up in a massive bar fight.
Jamen, jeg tror, det er nogle prøvemedlemmer, der spiller op og provokerer hinanden. De er ligesom i hver sin ende af det der festområde der, og så er der nogen, der absolut skal hen i den ende, hvor Saturdarah er. Så jeg tror faktisk, det er nogen fra HA, der starter det lidt.
And it all started with a snide comment. According to Extra Bladet, it was members of HA and AK81 who provoked the Saturdarah members by calling them a simple street gang. The brawl involved more than 30 people and started inside the bar, before moving out in the street with many regular people and families who now had to run for cover. The fight ended in a parking lot, when police came and arrested the involved. There were reports of both knives being used, and that guns had been fired in this very public place, though no guns were found by the police when they searched the involved. Fortunately, no bystanders were harmed, but one of the Saturdarah and 2 Hells Angels members were injured with stab wounds. A total of 28 people were arrested. Now, there was no turning back for either of the clubs, and the war now exploded with several violent incidences. But before we continue, let's take a quick look at Satudarah. Satudarah was founded in 1990 in the Dutch town of Moordrecht and is considered to be one of the most brutal and violent biker clubs in the world. Something they also practice against their own members who they believe have broken the rules. But keep in mind that there is a camera team present when this happened.
Hey, zo man. Ja? Rustig. Rustig, jongens. Rustig. Hey, nou wil ik even niks doen, jongens. Ik wil normaal praten.
The punishment for allegedly having given information to someone outside the club is losing your colors.
En liegen mag niet bij Satudarah. Haal af die jas. Wegwezen.
This member was later let back in when it turned out he hadn't talked to anybody. It was a misunderstanding internally. He later became president of one of the new chapters in Holland. But if you have killed for the club...
Dus hier sprak ik met hem af. En hier kwam hij aanlopen en ik wou op mijn vuurwapen trok. Toen heb ik helemaal het magazijn leeggesloten. Toen schoot ik hem dood. Toen heb ik hem in de auto laten leggen en heb ik hem vervolgens op een andere locatie heb ik hem gedumpt. Oh.
And done your time. You get a completely different reception and welcome back.
Neef, ik wil je welkom ons midden heten. Je bent volledig ten onrechte natuurlijk even van ons weg geweest. We zijn blij dat je er weer bent. We gaan een klein feestje vanavond bouwen. En dus zeg maar welkom, Maren. Laat me binnen! Satudarah te
Satudarah were the fastest-growing biker club in Europe and now rivaled the Hells Angels in power and influence. They were taking over the drug trade from the Angels, along with other businesses where the Angels were heavily invested.
Die neuen Revierkämpfe von Hells Angels, Bandidos und Satudarah werden immer brutaler. Am Sonntag feuerten Unbekannte mehr als 12 Schüsse auf einen Duisburger Hells Angel ab. 4 Tage zuvor wurde in Düsseldorf ein Satudarah-Mitglied niedergestochen.
Es geht hier knallhartes Geschäft im Drogenhandel, im Prostitutionsgewerbe und da will man eigene Marktanteile durchsetzen.
At this time, Hells Angels Denmark had just finished their third war, lost power and influence, and many internal conflicts had split the club. It was no longer the powerful club it once was. Bjorn Junkie Nielsen works as a mediator between the members who are in conflict, something that later would become his downfall in the club, and he had his hands full with domestic rivalry and power struggles.
Det galt om at finde noget at stikke hinanden i ryggen med, ikke? Og problemer og pis og lort, ikke? Altså, jeg var lige ved at sige, at der var brug for en god krig snart, ikke? Så folk de kunne fokusere på noget andet, ikke?
Det var en trussel mod hele klubben. Så jeg får jo 10 henvendelser om måneden til sidst, på om jeg gider kigge på deres sag, eller de er blevet smidt ud uretfærdigt eller et eller andet. Og det kan jeg konstatere, at de er næsten hver gang.
One of the problems for the Angels were their recruitment pool. Like many one-percenter clubs, they only accepted white males, at least at this time, and with an average of 2 to 3 members being kicked out and bad standing every year, the club's membership had stagnated. Saturdarah, on the other hand, welcomed every ethnicity and did not have the same recruiting problem as Hells Angels. Quite the contrary. They were the new club in town. They were, as they say in Thailand, same but different, making them exciting and interesting for many wannabe bikers. Nielsen says that he personally didn't have any problems with having people of color as members in the club, but that this was an American rule that also applied to them. In other words, there was nothing they could do about that. Saturdarah quickly amassed twice the numbers of members that the Angels had and took over many of the areas that had previously been dominated by the Angels.
Hvis du for eksempel 250 mand i dit miljø, og du kan se, at de andre miljøer efterhånden begynder at blive flere tusind, så er man jo nødt til at tænke ud af boksen. Og det skaber jo så en åbning for, at det er bandemedlemmer, der kommer ind. Og det er ligesom den vej, man har valgt at tage nu. Det er ikke min vej. En gadebande har ingen traditioner. Den er samlet om sociale problemer om at lave kriminalitet. Det kan du ikke bygge en motorcykelfællesskab på.
But the former Brothas member Mustafa disagrees with Nielsen and has this to say.
Jeg kender adskillige mennesker, som har indtrådt i Bandidos og i HA, som aldrig nogensinde har haft den mindste relation til en motorcykel. Nogle af dem kan ikke engang finde ud af at køre det, men så har fået den efterfølgende netop fordi det har været en eller anden slags krav for at blive optaget i de her klubber. Så for mit vedkommende har jeg aldrig nogensinde opfattet HA som værende en motorcykelklub.
In response to Saturdarah, Hell's Angels now begins to accept former enemies into the club, and several former bandidos that had been left in bad standing were now welcomed in as new angels, something that had been unthinkable shortly before.
Der er også en vis naivitet i det miljø, fordi at mange af de her døde mennesker kan vidne om, at de døde forgæves, når de så finder ud af, at deres drabsmænd fester med hans såkaldte brødre, ikke?
For a few HA members, this was hard to accept, but not much they could do about it either. This came from the leadership of the club in Denmark. And of course, it was also the other way around. Former members of Hell's Angels who had been kicked out now were welcomed into Bandidos and Satudarah. Among them, Ole Ost Nielsen, who was convicted in the killing of bullshit President Hovding and a civilian, and bore the patch filthy few for this when he was an angel. He and another former HA member, Sven Holst, who I, in a former video by mistake called Ludwig, is welcomed into his new club by his former angel's brother Ost. In 2009, Sven was involved in what has been dubbed by biker journalists as an internal cleansing, where 10 members out of nearly 20 in Aarhus were kicked out. The reason for the collective punishment was mainly disagreement about the line in the conflicts against the immigrant gangs. Check out my video for more on that. They were not among the aggressors and were seen as old-fashioned by some of the other Angels chapters. Sven now took over as leader of this chapter and was also one of the involved in what Junkie called a coup against him when he was kicked out in 2020. Sven was himself kicked out of Hell's Angels 6 months later and became president of a Saturdarah chapter in Denmark.
I think that it's ironic that the Hell's Angels have kicked out so many people that it's given them enough ex-members that is now a force to be reckoned with.
After the first brawl at the pub and only a few days later, in a harrowing incident, 2 members of AK-81 tried to mow down a young man from Satudarah with a car in Ganlos. Miraculously, he narrowly escaped the deadly assault, rushing into the sanctuary of a nearby police station. Yet, as he made his exit later on, a police search of the vehicles arriving to fetch him unveiled a collection of axes and knives concealed within the trunk. That night descended into brutality when a car carrying 3 assailants ruthlessly struck a man. They didn't stop there. With chilling intent, they pummeled him with an iron pipe. Although the victim was familiar with several members of Saturdarah, he wasn't among their ranks. The police swiftly caught up with one of the perpetrators, a man linked to Hell's Angels, who soon found himself in jail in connection with the brutal assault. In a subsequent crackdown, police detained 10 individuals with ties to Satudarah. According to the police, they were hunting for members of HA and AK-81. In their cars, the police found, among other things, shovels, spikes, and an axe. Adding to the wave of violence, a Saturdarah member faced a brutal attack within the confines of Horse Rod State Prison. The very HA associate previously implicated in the Ganlos hit and run was now also charged in connection with this savage prison assault. So putting him in the same prison as his enemies didn't stop him. Maybe Danish prison authorities should make a note of that. The violence escalates and several Satudarah members are arrested for extortion, drug sale, violence, and weapon smuggling. They became very visible, unlike the angels who mostly used members of support groups to do their biddings, and in this way protect themselves from direct involvement. In the autumn of 2017, Satudarah also came into a conflict with the Bandidos, with several shooting episodes and a violent mass brawl at a boxing match in Herlev, where 2 Bandidos were injured after being attacked with knives. Later that year, the Satudarah member Kevin Joel Anderson was stabbed several times with a knife at his home in what was believed to be an internal conflict in the club. 2 men connected to Satudarah were charged with murder and for dismembering the dead body and dump it in a forest.
I augusti förra året kom en 21-årig man i Köpenhamn i kontakt med den danska polisen. Han var själv skadad och hade viktig information. Det var så polisen fick kännedom om ett bestialiskt styckmord där 21-åringen haft en huvudroll. Upptäckte polisen kroppsdelar i en skogsdunge i närheten av ett bostadsområde.
It is not something we see every day, said Prosecutor Morten Fredrickson to the newspapers. One of the accused, a 21-year-old, claimed he had been forced to dismember the body of his friend by his 34-year-old co-accused. However, they were both convicted. In 2018, an immigrant and former gang member named Nadim was shot and killed by Alexander Findanis, a prospect of Satudarah who became a fully patched member shortly after. And just like the Hells Angels have their filthy few patch, outlaws have the SS patch, and bandidos have their own for killing someone, so does Satudarah.
Nou wordt een 1% teken uitgereikt.
Nico is gefeliciteerd. Jongens, jullie weten dat een 1% teken speciale tekens hebt in onze club. Weten we allemaal. Nico heb iets speciaals gedaan. Een daad van agressie. Er was een probleem wat Nico hardhandig de grond in heeft gedrukt. In het bijzijn van mijzelf. En vandaar dat je 1% krijgt. Dus ik vraag je traag en met eer in geweten. En gefeliciteerd.
The Danish Minister of Justice, Peter Hummelgaard, had stated in a parliamentary response that biker and gang groups must be fought with all the tools we have at our disposal. If Norway also gets their ban through, there are rumors that it could mean a de facto ban in Europe against Satudarah. Hummelgaard has tasked the Danish National Unit for Serious Crime to investigate whether there is a basis for initiating dissolution proceedings against existing biker clubs and/or gang groups in Denmark. The minister has directly named Satudarah and not Hells Angels or Bandidos yet, but if successful, Bandidos and Hells Angels will most likely be next. The war between Hells Angels and Satudarah in Denmark left only the Angels standing, while Satudarah morphed into a new club, along with many of their other European chapters. In Norway, 3 out of 4 chapters disbanded and did not take on any new colors, while the 4th in Oslo say they will continue with the same colors as before. However, since all the 9 members are in prison or awaiting prosecution, the Norwegian police consider them as unimportant in the Norwegian biker environment. But the violence and crimes that Satudarah brought with them might turn out to be all 1%er clubs' downfall in Scandinavia, depending on the outcome of these inquiries. Neither Hells Angels nor Satudarah won this war. It was again the police and the authorities that were the real winners.
Det hele starter ud med HA's indtog i Danmark. Og selvom det ikke er HA, der sidder monopolet i Danmark, hvad angår rockermiljøet, så er det alligevel dem, som har haft hele den her udforming af, hvordan den danske underverden er endt med at blive i dag. Altså, det er jo et eller andet sted HA det hele. Bare med andre navne.
Please smash that like and subscribe button as if you were a biker trying to get another member in bad standing. And please check out my other videos on this channel to see if there are others you find interesting. And I hope to see you in the next one.